Claire Carter woke up with a pounding headache and the strange sensation that she had been living inside someone else's body for the last 12 hours. The neon lights of Las Vegas were still dancing behind her eyelids, a blur of music perfume and the warm strength of a stranger's hands. She blinked rapidly at the sunlight creeping through the blinds of the hotel suite. The bed smelled of champagne and cologne. Her dress from the night before was crumpled on the floor like a discarded secret. Fragments of the night returned to her in jagged pieces. A poker table, a man with dark, stormy eyes, a low voice that had commanded the room with effortless authority, a dance that had felt more like surrender than celebration. Then the hotel elevator, then his mouth, then nothing but fire and a blur of skin and silk. She squeezed her eyes shut as if that could erase the memory, but it only sharpened. She had given herself to a stranger. It had been reckless, stupid, and unlike her entirely. She sat up quickly, pulling the blanket around her. Her hand flew to her neck. The necklace her mother had given her, a small silver pendant she never removed, was gone. She searched the sheets, the nightstand, the carpet. Nothing. The loss felt heavier than the act itself. Whoever that man was, he had walked away with more than just her dignity. By afternoon, another fear replaced the shame. Claire leaned over the bathroom sink, pale and trembling. Her stomach twisted. She had never missed a cycle before, not once. Now she was late. The nausea in the pit of her stomach was relentless. She gripped the porcelain basin, whispering no over and over. A one-night mistake was one thing. A pregnancy was something else entirely. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend Leah. Claire answered with shaking fingers. Leah's voice was bright and oblivious. "What happened to you last night? Did you fall off the map? You never texted." Claire tried to steady her breathing. I made a mistake. Leah, I think I slept with someone." Leah gasped. "You think you either did or you didn't." Claire's voice cracked. "I did. I do not even remember his name." Leah was silent for a moment. Then she softened. "Claire, are you okay?" "Are you safe?" Claire whispered. "I think I might be pregnant." Leah was quiet again, then practical. "Go check. Better safe than sorry." Claire closed her eyes. The thought of walking into a clinic, explaining herself to a stranger, made her sick. But Leah was right. She could not hide from this. She had to know. The next morning she dressed in the plainest clothes she owned, a simple gray sweater and jeans, hoping to look invisible. She pulled her hair into a bun and wore dark glasses, though it was cloudy outside. She took the subway to Midtown, her hands clenched so tightly around her purse that her knuckles were white. Every sound of laughter, every baby stroller she passed, felt like a cruel reminder of what might be inside her. When she reached Reed Care Medical, she froze at the entrance. The building was tall and gleaming, its glass facade reflecting the clouds like a mirror. Everyone in New York knew Reed Care. It was the most exclusive private clinic in the city, famous for serving celebrities, politicians, and the ultra-wealthy. Claire did not belong here. She was a struggling graduate who worked part-time to pay rent. Yet Leah had insisted this was the place, the most discreet. No one would gossip. Inside the lobby was silent and cool, decorated with marble floors and orchids in tall vases. A receptionist with perfect hair looked up and smiled politely. "Appointment." Claire nodded weakly. "Pregnancy test." The receptionist entered her name into the system and handed her a clipboard. Claire filled the forms with a trembling hand. She wanted to disappear into the floor. She imagined the receptionist judging her, picturing her as another careless young woman who had made poor choices in the city that never forgave mistakes. After what felt like hours, a nurse called her name. Claire followed down a long hallway lined with frosted glass doors. The nurse's voice was cheerful, as though nothing in the world was heavy. "This way, Miss Carter. The doctor will be with you shortly." Claire sat on the examination bed, the paper crinkling beneath her. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought the nurse might hear it from outside. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to be anywhere else but here. The door opened. She looked up, and the air was punched out of her lungs. The man who walked in wore a white coat stethoscope hanging from his neck, but there was no mistaking him. His eyes were the same stormy gray she had drowned in 2 nights ago in Las Vegas. The line of his jaw was sharp, his movements controlled, his presence overwhelming. Claire's mouth went dry. It was him, the stranger, the man she had given herself to without a second thought. He froze when he saw her, though his face gave nothing away. For a moment the silence was unbearable. Then, with professional calm, he set the folder on the counter. "Ms. Carter, I am Dr. Reed." Her pulse hammered. Reed. She remembered that name from somewhere. And then it hit her. Alexander Reed, billionaire heir of the Reed Care empire, the youngest CEO in the medical industry. She had seen his photo in Forbes in Wall Street Journal. He was not just a doctor. He was one of the most powerful men in the city. Her voice cracked. "You." His eyes flickered for the briefest second, then returned to professional detachment. "Please relax. I need to perform a standard examination before we proceed with the test." Claire's breath caught. He moved closer, pulling on gloves, his eyes avoiding hers, though she could feel the tension ripple through the room. When his hand gently pressed against her chest to check her heartbeat, she flinched violently. The paper beneath her crinkled louder than ever. She whispered hoarsely, "What are you doing?" He looked at her evenly. "Exactly what I am supposed to do. Nothing more." But her mind was screaming. This was not a stranger anymore. This was the man from last night, the billionaire who now stood between her and the answer that could change her life forever. Alexander Reed had lived 2 lives, and both of them demanded everything from him. The first was the life of the physician, the young prodigy, who had entered medical school at 20 and graduated with honors before most of his peers had finished internships. He had a steady pair of hands and a mind that worked like clockwork under pressure. Patients trusted him. Colleagues envied him. Newspapers once called him the miracle doctor of New York. But life had not allowed him to remain only that. When his father, founder of Reed Care Medical, died unexpectedly of a stroke, the empire landed on Alexander's shoulders. Overnight, he became not just a physician, but the CEO of one of the most powerful health networks in the country. The board had expected him to quit practicing. They had told him he was too valuable to waste hours in examination rooms, yet he had refused. At least once a week, he put on his white coat and entered a clinic room because medicine was not just a career. It was his anchor, the last thread connecting him to who he used to be before money and power defined him. He had built a routine around that choice. He arrived early. Red files met patients with a calm that masked exhaustion. Every examination was meant to remind him that he was still human, still capable of compassion, still more than just numbers on a financial report. But nothing had prepared him for today. The moment he had opened the door and seen Claire Carter sitting on that table, his composure had cracked like glass. 2 nights ago, he had seen her under neon light, flushed with laughter, carrying herself like someone desperate to escape reality. He had not planned it. He never planned nights like that. In fact, he had never allowed himself to fall into anything so reckless. Yet she had disarmed him with one glance, with the tilt of her chin, with the way she whispered yes when the city outside had roared. He had thought she was gone forever. Now here she was, trembling in his office, looking at him like he was both her salvation and her curse. He forced his voice into neutrality. He had to. The paper file in his hand reminded him that she was not just a memory, but a patient now. Still, when his fingers brushed her skin in that routine examination, he felt the electricity of recognition. The faint birthmark under her collarbone was the final confirmation. She was the woman from Las Vegas. Claire pulled back her eyes, blazing with suspicion. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He answered evenly, "Exactly what I am supposed to do, nothing more." But inside he was unraveling. He could not reveal the truth here, not yet. He finished the check, quickly stepping back, as if distance could protect him from the storm rising in her. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if shielding from both diagnosis and him. The silence between them was unbearable. He wanted to tell her that he remembered everything, that the night had not been meaningless, that he had searched for her pendant in the sheets after she left. But he could not now. The role of doctor bound him like chains. Claire's eyes filled with humiliation. She thought he was taking advantage. He saw it in the flush of her cheeks, the way she refused to meet his gaze. His throat tightened. He wanted to explain, but any explanation would sound like manipulation. Finally, she slid off the table, clutching her bag, as if it was a shield. "I want a different doctor," she said. Her voice shook, but her back was straight. Before he could answer, she pushed past him and left the room. The echo of the closing door was louder than any monitor alarm. Alexander stood there, gloves still on, staring at the space she had occupied. The board would not understand why he cared. His colleagues would laugh if they knew he had lost control over a patient. But this was not just a patient. She was the one woman he had not been able to forget. He pulled off the gloves and sat heavily in the chair. His reflection in the glass cabinet looked tired, older than 32. He wondered if this was punishment for daring to live 2 lives. Billionaire and doctor. He could save hundreds of patients but fail to hold on to one woman. He closed the file, but her name on the cover burned into his mind. Claire Carter. He whispered it once, letting it linger in the sterile air. He knew she would not come back. He knew she saw him as a threat now. Yet part of him refused to let go, because behind her fear he had seen something else flicker in her eyes. Recognition, memory, the same pull that haunted him since that night. Claire burst out of the examination room with her heart hammering like a war drum. The corridors of Reed Care felt too narrow, the walls pressing in, as if the entire building knew her shame. She barely noticed the startled nurse calling after her. All she wanted was distance from that man, that doctor, that billionaire who had dared to touch her chest with hands. She remembered for entirely different reasons. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she pushed through the lobby and out into the biting New York wind. The air was sharp in her lungs, but it did not calm her. Images tumbled in her mind, like a reel of punishment, his eyes locking onto hers, the calm way he said his name, Reed, Alexander Reed. She had known the name from magazines, from news segments on television, from articles that called him the golden heir of modern medicine. She had seen his photographs before, and yet somehow she had never connected the dots that the man who had held her in Vegas could be the same one who ran a billion-dollar medical empire. Now he had stood over her as a doctor, cool and detached, pretending as if she were nothing more than another patient. Her throat ached from humiliation. She could still feel the weight of his hand on her chest, hear the measured tone of his voice telling her to relax, relax. How could she relax when every nerve in her body had screamed with recognition? She reached the subway entrance and descended quickly, fumbling for her Metro card with trembling fingers. A woman jostled her shoulder and muttered something, but Claire barely heard. She sank onto the cold plastic seat inside the train, her breath fogging the window. She wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. Instead, a kind of numb fury wrapped around her. He had used her once without names, without promises, and now he had reduced her again, this time to a medical file. Claire pressed her forehead to the glass, the motion of the train rocking her into a haze. She remembered the way he had looked at her in Vegas, not as a billionaire, but as a man stripped of pretense. His touch had felt like fire, his kiss like drowning. She had believed it was something real foolish as it sounded. Now she knew better. To him it had probably been nothing, just a reckless moment in a city, built for sins that never followed you home. But for her, it followed everywhere, even into her own body. What if she really was pregnant? The thought tightened her chest more than shame ever could. A stranger, a powerful stranger, a man who could crush her with one word. She shut her eyes and tried to breathe. Across the city, Alexander sat in his office, the file unopened on his desk. His assistants moved around him quietly, sensing the storm under his silence. He dismissed them with a curt gesture and leaned back in his chair. The birthmark had removed all doubt. Claire Carter was the woman from Vegas. He remembered every detail of her that night. The way she had laughed too loudly at a bad joke. The way her hair had fallen across her face when she danced, the way she had clutched the silver necklace before pulling him into the elevator. He had searched for her after she disappeared. He had woken to find only that pendant left behind and a hollow ache in his chest. For weeks he had told himself it was better not to find her. He was not a man who could give himself freely. His life was too complicated, his responsibilities too crushing. But fate had not asked for his permission. She had walked back into his world, not as a dream, but as a patient in his clinic. And now she hated him. Alexander rubbed his temples, frustration tearing at his composure. He could have told her the truth. He could have said that he remembered that he had not touched her as a doctor, but as a man who had never forgotten her. But to admit that in that room would have been unprofessional, dangerous. So he had chosen silence, and silence had turned into betrayal in her eyes. He swore softly under his breath. He wanted to go after her to explain, but the CEO in him reminded that explanations rarely mattered. Perception was stronger than truth, and her perception of him was already poisoned. Still, something in his chest rebelled. He could not let her vanish again. Claire reached her small apartment in Queens long after the sky had gone gray. She locked the door and collapsed onto the couch. the exhaustion finally overtaking her. Her reflection in the dark television screen looked foreign. Her lips pressed together, her eyes shadowed with confusion and fear. Leah arrived minutes later, carrying takeout and worry. She placed the food on the table and sat beside Claire. "Tell me everything," Claire whispered. "He was the doctor." Leah frowned. "Who?" Claire lifted her head, her voice barely audible. "The man from Vegas." Leah's mouth fell open. "The billionaire doctor CEO." Claire nodded, shame flooding her again. Leah exhaled slowly. "That is not just a coincidence. That is fate knocking on your door." Claire shook her head fiercely. "No, it is a curse. He looked at me like I was just another file. He touched me like I was nothing." Leah tried to protest, but Claire cut her off. "I cannot face him again. I cannot." Leah touched her hand gently. "Maybe you do not have to face him. Maybe you just need to take the test and move on." Claire closed her eyes. She wanted to believe it was that simple. But deep down she knew that no matter what the results said, Alexander Reed was already tangled in her life. Meanwhile, Alexander stood by his office window, overlooking Manhattan, the city glittering like shards of broken glass. He told himself to let her go, to focus on shareholders' contract surgeries. But the image of her walking away burned into his mind. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed the doctor and Alexander Reed the CEO wanted the same thing. They wanted Claire Carter. Claire tried to bury herself in routine, hoping that if she moved fast enough, worked hard enough, maybe the memories would dull and the panic would fade. She applied to every tutoring job she could find, scrolling endlessly, through listings sending her resume to families who needed someone to teach math, science, even piano, though she had not played in years. Rent was due, her savings were thin, and the thought of an extra hospital bill, if she really was pregnant, haunted her every night. When one of the agencies called her back with an urgent offer, she barely listened to the details. A private client in need of a live-in tutor for a young girl. Pay was generous, conditions discreet. Claire said yes before asking who it was. Anything to keep her afloat. She took the subway to the address scribbled on the paper. A mansion in the Upper East Side, so vast it looked like something pulled out of a movie set. Her hands trembled as she rang the bell, reminding herself this was just another job. A uniformed maid opened the door and guided her through marble halls filled with paintings and quiet wealth. Claire's chest tightened with unease. This was not her world. She belonged in small apartments and crowded coffee shops, not palaces where chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. The maid smiled politely. "The master will see you in the library." Claire's steps faltered. Master. She hated the word, but she followed anyway, clutching her folder of credentials. The double doors opened, and the sight on the other side made her blood run cold. Alexander Reed stood by a grand bookshelf, his tall frame outlined by sunlight, streaming through tall windows. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. Their eyes collided like two storms crashing into each other. For a heartbeat, silence devoured the room. Claire's breath caught. No, not here, not again. She spun toward the maid, panic rising. There must be some mistake, but Alexander's voice cut through the air, low and steady. "There is no mistake. You are here for the position." Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. She clutched the folder so tightly the edges bent. "I cannot do this. I should go." His gaze held her still. His tone was calm but carried an undercurrent of something dangerous. "You need the job. My niece needs a tutor. Stay." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Yet Claire felt the urge to fight. She wanted to scream that he was the reason. She had spent nights awake with fear that he had turned her world upside down with a single look. But rent whispered louder than pride, and necessity chained her tongue. She forced herself to face him. "Fine, I will stay. For her, not for you." His eyes flickered just briefly at her defiance. Then he nodded, understood. A door opened and a young girl bounded in laughter, spilling into the heavy room. "Uncle Alex, is she the new teacher?" Alexander softened in a way Claire had not thought possible. His hand rested lightly on the girl's shoulder. "Yes, this is Miss Carter. She will be helping you." The girl grinned, pulling Claire toward a table covered with books and puzzles. Claire allowed herself to be distracted, sinking into the rhythm of teaching. Numbers, words, gentle encouragement. For a moment she could almost pretend she was not sitting in the home of the man who had once unraveled her. But every time she looked up, Alexander was there, watching silently from the corner, his expression unreadable. The tension between them was an invisible current, humming just beneath the surface of ordinary conversation. That night, after the girl had gone to bed, Claire gathered her things to leave. She stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Alexander. His presence filled the narrow space, the faint scent of his cologne, striking her with cruel familiarity. "Excuse me," she whispered, trying to move past. He shifted slightly, blocking her path without touching her. "You do not have to be afraid of me," he said quietly. Her chest tightened. Afraid. That word did not even begin to cover the chaos inside her. "I am not afraid. I just do not trust you." His jaw tightened, as if her words struck deeper than she intended. "Good," he murmured finally. "Then let me earn it." She met his gaze, searching for arrogance, for mockery, for the cold CEO mask. Instead, she saw something else flickering there, something dangerously close to vulnerability. It unsettled her more than anger ever could. She broke eye contact and slipped past him, her steps quick, her heart even quicker. In his study, Alexander poured himself a drink he did not touch. He stared at the amber liquid as memories of her laughter in Vegas echoed like ghosts. He had sworn to let her go that morning in the clinic. Yet fate had brought her to his house, into his family, into his daily life. He knew better than to believe in destiny. But when he looked at her, when he heard her voice steady, despite fear, something in him whispered that this was not coincidence. It was inevitability. Upstairs, Claire sat on the edge of the guest bed the maid had prepared for her, her suitcase half unpacked. She pressed her palm against her stomach, the gnawing uncertainty of pregnancy still hanging like a shadow. She told herself this job was temporary, that she would save enough money and leave, that she could keep her distance from Alexander Reed. Yet she knew the truth. Distance was impossible when every wall in this house echoed with his presence. And in her heart, despite every warning, she felt the pull of something stronger than fear. Claire had promised herself she would keep everything strictly professional. The girl she was tutoring deserved stability, and Claire could not risk blending her personal chaos with her job. She kept her tone bright and her lessons structured, filling the days with multiplication tables, spelling games, and bedtime stories. Yet no matter how hard she tried, Alexander's presence slipped into every corner of her new routine. He worked in his study with the doors half open, his voice drifting down the hall, during phone calls that sounded more like battles. Sometimes she caught him in the kitchen, late at night, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded, preparing tea with the kind of quiet concentration that felt out of place in a billionaire's home. Other times he appeared in the library where she taught, standing silently by the shelves, watching his niece's progress with a pride he tried to hide. Claire told herself she did not care that she was immune, but her body betrayed her every time his shadow lengthened across the room. One evening, after a long lesson, she climbed the wide staircase, carrying a stack of books. The mansion felt unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against her ears. She had almost reached the landing when her foot slipped on the polished wood. The books flew, her body tilted. Panic screamed in her throat. But before she could fall, strong arms caught her. Alexander pulled her against him with reflexes honed from years of medicine, steadying her with one hand at her waist and the other gripping her wrist. Claire gasped, her heart hammering wildly. He held her close enough that she could feel the rapid thud of his heartbeat beneath his shirt. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. She shook her head quickly, but her breath refused to steady. For one suspended moment, they were frozen in the half-light, her face inches from his eyes searching hers with an intensity that burned. Then reality crashed back. She pulled away abruptly, gathering the fallen books, her cheeks blazing. "I am fine," she muttered. "Thank you." He crouched to help, his hand brushing hers, as they both reached for the same book. The contact sent a jolt through her, sharp and undeniable. She snatched her hand back as if burned. "You need to be more careful," he said softly. The tone was gentle, not commanding, and that gentleness disarmed her more than authority ever could. She avoided his gaze, clutching the books to her chest as a shield. "I said I am fine." He did not argue, but the weight of his stare lingered as she hurried down the hall. That night she lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, her body still humming with the memory of his arms around her. She hated herself for remembering. She hated the warmth that spread in her chest when she thought of his heartbeat pressed against her back. But the more she tried to bury it, the stronger it became. The next week brought more moments she could not erase. A rainy afternoon when the power flickered, forcing them to light candles in the library. Alexander had joined them, helping his niece with a puzzle, his long fingers moving pieces with surprising patience. Claire had watched him laugh quietly when the girl insisted he had chosen the wrong edge, and the sound had struck her harder than she expected. It was not the laugh of a billionaire fighting boardrooms. It was the laugh of a man who had once simply wanted to heal. Another evening she had stepped into the kitchen to find him making hot cocoa for his niece. He handed her a mug without a word, steam curling between them. She accepted reluctantly, sipping slowly. The silence was warm, not heavy, and for a moment she felt as though they were not strangers at all, but something fragile and new. The tension built until it was impossible to ignore. It peaked one night when she was reviewing a history lesson in the library. Alexander entered unexpectedly, asking his niece to head upstairs early. The girl obeyed, leaving them alone. Claire stood to leave as well, but his voice stopped her. "Claire." Just her name, spoken low and deliberate, yet it rooted her to the spot. She turned reluctantly. He took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "About that night in Vegas," he began. She froze, her throat dry. "Do not, please do not." His jaw tightened. You think it meant nothing, but it did not. She swallowed hard, shaking her head. "It cannot mean anything now." I am your employee. You are you. He moved another step closer, close enough that she could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. And you are not just my employee. His words pulled at her defenses, unraveling them thread by thread. Her voice trembled. Why are you doing this? Because I cannot stop thinking about you, he said simply. The honesty in his tone shattered her more than any confession of love. She stumbled back a step, her pulse racing. We cannot. His gaze darkened, but he did not push further. Instead, he nodded slowly, almost painfully. Then we will not. For now. The restraint in his voice made her chest ache more than desire ever could. That night, she lay in bed staring at the silver pendant he had returned to her earlier that day. He had found it, kept it, and now handed it back without explanation. The weight of it against her skin was heavier than any secret she carried. She turned restlessly under the sheets, torn between fear and longing. Down the hall, Alexander stood alone by the window, the city lights reflecting in his storm-gray eyes. He knew he was crossing lines, risking not just scandal, but his own carefully built walls. Yet when he remembered the way she had looked at him, when she nearly fell on the stairs, wide-eyed and vulnerable, he realized the truth he could no longer deny. He wanted her, not as a memory, not as a mistake, but as something real. The question was whether she would ever let him. The first photograph appeared 2 weeks later, a grainy shot captured in the early morning when Claire left the mansion with a stack of books in her arms. At first, she thought nothing of it, just another passerby with a phone. But the image spread across social media with frightening speed, captioned with speculative headlines, "Mystery young tutor seen leaving Alexander Reed's mansion." Within hours, gossip blogs twisted the story into something uglier. Was she seducing the billionaire doctor CEO? Was this another gold digger trying to climb into the elite circle of New York's power players? Claire read the comments under one post and felt her stomach churn. Gold digger, homewrecker, fraud. Strangers judged her without knowing her name, dissecting her hair, her clothes, her smile. By evening, the story hit mainstream media. The photograph replayed on television, commentators smirking as they asked if the genius doctor had finally fallen for a scandal. Claire hid in her room, her phone buzzing endlessly with notifications she refused to open. Leah called, her voice sharp with both worry and disbelief. "Claire, you need to control the story. Say something. Deny it," Claire whispered. "Who would believe me? They already decided what I am." Meanwhile, in the Reed Care boardroom, Alexander sat at the head of a long glass table, facing a half-circle of directors. Their expressions were a mixture of disgust and alarm. One man slid the photo across the table as if presenting evidence of a crime. "This is unacceptable. Investors are calling. They want reassurance." Another director leaned forward. "You are not just a doctor, Mr. Reed. You are the face of a billion-dollar company. You cannot be seen harboring a scandal in your own home. Drop her, quietly. Pay her off if necessary." Alexander's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. "She is my niece's tutor, that is all." The board member scoffed. "No one believes that. The girl is half your age, lives under your roof, and is already being painted as your mistress. The damage is done. Investors are skittish. If you want to keep them, distance yourself." Alexander's gaze swept across the table, icy and unyielding. "I will not throw her out because of lies." Silence fell heavy, but the threat of rebellion simmered beneath it. They could not control him, but they could make his reign unbearable. After the meeting, he returned to the mansion, his chest tight with anger. He found Claire in the garden, her face pale under the moonlight, her phone clenched in her hand. She looked up at him with wide, desperate eyes. "Why is this happening? I did nothing." His chest ached at her trembling voice. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly. But she shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "They are tearing me apart. People I do not know call me names. They say I am pregnant, that I am selling myself for money. I cannot breathe." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "I should leave," she whispered. "It is the only way to stop this." His voice hardened. "No, if you leave, they win." She shook her head, her resolve breaking. "This is your empire, Alexander. I cannot be the reason it falls. I will pack my things tonight." He stared at her, his heart thundering with fear and fury. "Do you think I care more about shareholders than about you?" But she could not meet his eyes. The shame was too heavy. She turned and fled into the house, leaving him standing in the cold. That night, the scandal escalated further. An anonymous account posted a fabricated ultrasound photo claiming Claire Carter was already carrying Alexander Reed's child. The image went viral within hours, hashtags trended, news anchors speculated on prime time. Claire saw it on her phone and felt her entire world collapse. She pressed her hand against her stomach, as if strangers could see through her. In her chest, a sob rose fierce and helpless. She had not even taken the test again, too afraid of the truth. Now the world had already decided for her. Upstairs, Alexander's phone rang nonstop. He ignored them all, focusing only on the thought of her crying somewhere in the house. He could handle boardrooms, shareholders, investors. He could battle the media. But watching her suffer for being near him was unbearable. He left his study and found himself outside her door, his fist raised but hesitating. For once, the man who commanded empires did not know what to say. Inside, Claire sat on the bed, clutching the silver pendant at her throat. She whispered into the darkness, "Why me? Why him?" She did not know if the tears were for the cruelty of the world or for the unbearable pull she still felt toward the man at her door. The storm of gossip only grew louder in the following days, but inside the mansion there was another storm, quieter yet far more dangerous. Claire avoided Alexander whenever possible, slipping out of rooms when he entered, burying herself in lesson plans, closing her door at night before he could approach. Yet she felt his presence everywhere, the echo of his footsteps in the hallway, the shadow of his gaze when she sat at the dinner table. The air between them was taut, stretched thin, with words unsaid. Finally, one night, he knocked. She almost did not answer, but something in the heaviness of that knock made her open the door. He stood there in a simple shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his face more weary than she had ever seen it. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Claire swallowed, trying to gather steel in her voice. "Talk about what? Lies, rumors, that ultrasound photo?" He stepped closer. "About the truth." Her pulse spiked, panic and anger colliding. "What truth? That I am a fool who let this happen. That I walked into your clinic and found out the man who touched me in Vegas was now touching me again, under the excuse of medicine." His eyes darkened with hurt, but he did not retreat. "You think Vegas meant nothing to me." She folded her arms, though her voice shook. "Did it not? You disappeared before dawn. You left nothing but—" She stopped, realizing she had revealed too much, but Alexander already knew. Slowly he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, delicate, familiar. A silver necklace, the same one she had clutched that night before falling asleep in his arms. Her breath caught as he held it out to her. "I have kept this for months," he said softly. "Do you think I keep things that mean nothing?" Claire's throat tightened. Her anger wanted to scream that he was lying, manipulating, but her heart trembled at the sight of the necklace. She shook her head violently. You set this up," she accused, her voice breaking. "The clinic, the tutoring job, all of this, you trapped me." He frowned, his voice low and strained. "No, fate trapped us. I never planned it." She laughed bitterly, tears spilling. "Fate. That is just your word for power. Men like you always get what you want." His face hardened, but his eyes stayed on hers. "If that were true, you would already be in my bed again. But you are not." "Because I want more than a night, Claire. I want all of you." The confession hung heavy in the air, thick with vulnerability, that unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. She clutched the doorframe for balance, her knees weak. "You cannot want me," she whispered. "I am nothing, just a tutor, a rumor, a scandal." He stepped closer, closing the space between them, his voice steady as stone. "You are the only woman I have not been able to forget. You think you are nothing, but to me, you are the only thing that feels real." Her chest ached, torn between fury and longing. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the world outside called her a liar, a gold digger, a fraud. And she was too afraid to step into the fire of his truth. She turned her face away, pressing back tears. "You should not say these things," she whispered. "It will ruin you." He lifted the necklace gently, letting it dangle between them. "Maybe, or maybe it will save me." The silence that followed was unbearable, every breath loud in the stillness. Claire could not hold it anymore. With shaking hands, she snatched the necklace from him and slammed the door. Outside, Alexander closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. For the first time in years, the man who conquered everything felt utterly powerless. Claire could not escape the gnawing fear that kept her awake at night. Every late period, every wave of nausea, every moment her body felt different, became another reason to panic. One morning, after hours of pacing, she finally forced herself to buy a test. She locked herself in the marble bathroom of the guest wing, her hands trembling as she unwrapped the box. Minutes crawled by, like years, the tiny stick, lying on the counter, while she sat on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest. When she finally looked, her breath hitched. 2 lines. Positive. The word blazed in her mind like fire. Her stomach turned, her throat dry. She pressed both palms against her flat abdomen, as if she could already feel a life stirring there. Panic swept through her. Pregnant, with his child. The very thing strangers online had accused her of now staring back at her in cruel confirmation. She thought of the headlines, of the boardroom whispers, of the word gold digger plastered on every screen. They would never believe it was an accident. They would say she planned this. She wanted to scream, but instead she pressed her fist to her mouth, stifling the sobs that shook her body. Hours later, Alexander found her in the garden, pale, withdrawn, her eyes swollen from crying. He crouched in front of her, concern etched into every line of his face. "Claire, talk to me." She shook her head, unable to form words. Finally, she whispered, "I took a test." His breath caught. And positive. The word shattered between them like glass. He inhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling as though the weight of the entire world pressed against him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached forward, taking her trembling hands in his. "No matter what, I will be here." Her eyes filled again, disbelief and fear mingling. "You do not understand. This ruins everything, your company, your life." His gaze was steady, unyielding. "Let it ruin me then. I will not let it ruin you." The sincerity in his voice broke something in her. She looked at him and saw not the CEO, not the doctor, but the man from that night in Vegas who had touched her with both fire and tenderness. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into the safety he offered. And for a moment she did, collapsing against his chest, letting him hold her as she cried into his shirt. For a few days they lived in a fragile bubble, tiptoeing around the possibility of a future neither had dared imagine. Alexander made discreet calls lining up specialists promising her she would not go through it alone. But fate, as always, was cruel. The hospital called her back, after running more precise blood work. "Chemical pregnancy," the doctor explained gently, "a false positive." Her body had thought she was pregnant, but the cells had not held. Claire sat in the cold exam room, staring at the sterile floor tiles while the words blurred together. Not pregnant, not real. Her chest tightened, torn between relief and a grief she did not expect. She stumbled outside, and Alexander was waiting. One look at her face and he knew. His arms went around her strong and steady, but she felt limp hollow. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Sorry for what? For not giving you the child, for being empty." His grip tightened, his voice rough. "Do not ever say that. You are not empty. You are everything." She broke down, then sobbing into him until her body shook with exhaustion. The world felt merciless, yanking her between terror and hope and despair. Yet through it all, he remained silent and unmovable, refusing to let her go. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how she had become this entangled in his life, how a single night in Vegas had become a destiny she could neither escape nor fully accept. And outside her door, Alexander sat in the hallway, keeping watch, determined that no matter what came next, she would not face it alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of whispers and tension. Even though the pregnancy scare had turned out to be false, the rumor still thrived like wildfire online. To the public eye, Claire was already guilty, the scandalous young woman who had trapped a billionaire doctor with her supposed pregnancy. Every time she walked down the street, she felt the burn of invisible eye strangers judging her cameras ready to snap. It was unbearable. Late one night, she stood by the window of her guest room, staring out at the city lights, her heart pounding with the decision she knew she had to make. When Alexander found her there, her suitcase half-packed, he stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Where are you going?" His voice was low but firm. Claire turned slowly, her hands clutching the handle of the suitcase, as if it were the only thing holding her up. "I cannot stay here anymore." His eyes narrowed. "Because of the board, because of the headlines." She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "They are destroying you because of me. If I leave, the noise will fade." His steps were slow, deliberate as he crossed the room toward her. "You think walking away will silence them. It will only prove them right." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "Maybe. But it will protect you. It will protect your company, your family, everything you built." His jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. I do not care about any of that if it means losing you." But she forced herself to meet his gaze, her own filled with sorrow. "I care, Alexander. I care enough to walk away, even if it breaks me." The silence stretched between them, heavy with pain, neither could ease. Finally, he reached out his fingers, brushing her cheek, tender and desperate. "Do not do this, Claire. Please." Her lips trembled, but she stepped back away from his touch, away from the heat that threatened to consume her. "I have to," she whispered. Then she picked up her suitcase and walked past him, each step tearing her apart. He stood, frozen fists clenched at his sides, watching the only woman he had ever wanted disappear down the hall. When the door closed behind her, the sound echoed like a gunshot in his chest. Alone in the silence, Alexander sank into the chair by the window, staring at the necklace she had left on the dresser. His empire meant nothing in that moment. His power, his wealth, his reputation, all useless against the truth that gutted him. She was gone, not because she did not care, but because she cared too much. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Reed, the man who had conquered everything, felt utterly defeated. Days turned into weeks, and though Claire tried to rebuild her life, outside the mansion, the shadows of the scandal followed her everywhere. Every job interview ended with awkward smiles once they discovered her name. Every attempt to walk down the street was met with whispers and sidelong glances. She hid in her small apartment, exhausted by the weight of judgment, and tried to convince herself she had done the right thing by leaving him. Meanwhile, Alexander drowned himself in board meetings and investor calls, but his focus was shattered. He stared blankly at contracts, his mind only replaying the moment she walked away. His advisors urged him to move on, to distance himself permanently, to make a clean public denial. But he refused. The emptiness of his house gnawed at him, the silence of her laughter unbearable. Finally, one morning after a night without sleep, he made a decision. If the world wanted a spectacle, he would give them one, but on his terms. The following week, the annual Reed Care Charity Gala filled the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel, an event broadcast live, attended by the city's elite. Flashing cameras lined the crimson carpet, reporters jostling for quotes, investors sipping champagne under crystal chandeliers. It was the perfect stage. Alexander entered in a black tuxedo, his tall frame commanding immediate attention. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Was he here alone? Had he left the scandal behind? Then the murmur grew louder as he strode to the podium at the front of the room, bypassing the usual small talk and auction introductions. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight," he began, his deep voice carrying through the hall. "But before we speak of charity, I must speak of something else, something more personal." The room fell into silence. Claire, watching from her apartment on the live stream, froze. Her heart thundered as his face filled the screen. Alexander drew in a steady breath, his gaze hard with resolve. "Recently, many of you have seen the stories, the lies, the photographs. You have whispered behind closed doors, and you have judged. You say the woman I care for is a fraud, a gold digger, a scandal." His voice sharpened, each word deliberate. "You are wrong. She is none of those things. She is the woman who walked into my life when I least expected it and showed me what it means to care again. She is not a weakness. She is my strength." The crowd gasped, the press surged forward, flashes exploding like lightning. Directors exchanged horrified looks, investors muttered furiously, but Alexander did not flinch. "I built this company," he continued, "because I believed in healing and hope. And I will not sacrifice the woman I love on the altar of profit. If any of you cannot stand by, that you are free to leave." Murmurs rose like a tide shock mingling with outrage. But he stood firm, his gaze sweeping the room with defiance. Claire sat frozen in front of her screen, her throat tight with tears. The man she had left to protect was now burning bridges in front of the entire city for her. She whispered his name, her hand pressed against her heart. Across the ballroom, a voice shouted, "Is she here? Bring her out." Cameras turned wildly. The crowd hungry for drama. Alexander's jaw clenched. She is not here tonight, but make no mistake, she is not hiding. She deserves dignity, not spectacle. The declaration only inflamed the frenzy. Social media erupted instantly, hashtags trending worldwide. Investors panicked, analysts speculated, but beneath the chaos, one undeniable truth spread: Alexander Reed had chosen love over power. Claire could not sit still. She grabbed her coat, her mind reeling, her heart torn between fear and the desperate pull to see him. By the time she reached the hotel, the gala was still buzzing, reporters flooding the lobby. She slipped past them, unnoticed, her body trembling as she searched for him. Upstairs, Alexander stood alone on a balcony. The city sprawled out below, the cool wind tugging at his hair. He had done it. The empire might crumble, his fortune might burn, but he felt strangely free. Then he heard the faint sound of footsteps. He turned. Claire stood in the doorway, her eyes shining with tears, her breath unsteady. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she crossed the distance between them, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that? You could lose everything." His gaze softened, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to smile. "Because without you, everything is nothing." Her heart clenched, the final wall inside her shattering. She reached for him, her fingers trembling against his chest. He pulled her into his arms, the city lights blazing around them, the roar of the world below, irrelevant compared to the quiet truth between them. For the first time since Vegas, she let herself believe. Believe in him. Believe in them. The gala had ended hours ago, but the echo of Alexander's declaration still thundered across every headline in America. Claire sat in the back seat of his car as it moved through the quiet city. Her mind a storm of disbelief and fragile hope. She had come expecting to beg him to stop risking everything for her. Instead, she had found herself in his arms again, swept up in the reckless honesty of his love. When they arrived at the hospital where it all began, she looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Why here?" His hand brushed hers with quiet conviction. "Because this is where fate threw us together. It is where I almost lost you, and tonight, I do not want to hide anymore." He led her inside through the silent corridors until they reached the small exam room, the same room where months earlier she had accused him of touching her without care. The lights hummed softly above them, the sterile scent of disinfectant in the air. But now it felt different. He turned to her, his eyes no longer the cold steel of a CEO, but the raw gaze of a man stripped bare. "Claire Carter." He said, his voice low and steady. "I told the world you are the woman I love. Now I am telling you." She trembled, her throat thick with tears. "Alexander, you cannot just say these things. The board will destroy you. Investors will abandon you." He stepped closer, lifting her chin so she could not look away. "Let them. I have lived my whole life for numbers, for deals, for power. Tonight I realized none of it matters if I cannot share it with you." She broke then, tears spilling freely, her voice breaking on the words she had buried for so long. "I tried to leave because I thought it would protect you, but the truth is I have never stopped thinking of you since that night in Vegas. I hate you for how you complicate my life, but I hate myself more because I—" She faltered, and he whispered the words for her. "Because you love me." She nodded, sobbing, and he pulled her into him, holding her as though he would never let go again. The kiss they shared was not the wild abandon of that first night, but something deeper, steadier, laced with both promise and desperation. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads pressed together, he murmured, "You do not need to be afraid anymore. Whatever comes, we face it together." For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe him. Days later, they appeared side by side at a public charity event. Alexander's hand firmly entwined with hers. Flashbulbs exploded, reporters shouted, but he did not flinch. He introduced her as the woman he loved unapologetically. The crowd gasped, investors bristled, but for every critic, there were thousands of people online who swooned at the love story unfolding in real time. Still beneath the glow of newfound acceptance, Claire felt a gnawing unease. One evening after dinner, she grew pale and excused herself. Alone in the bathroom, she clutched the counter as a wave of dizziness overtook her. She stared at her reflection, pale and trembling, and felt the familiar fear return. "Not again," she whispered. With trembling hands, she took another tad, her breath caught in her throat as the minutes passed. When she finally looked down, her knees buckled. Positive. This time the lines were darker, undeniable. She sank onto the floor, the test clutched in her hand, her heart racing with terror and awe. Pregnant, truly pregnant. The irony was cruel. The world had already condemned her once for carrying his child when it had been a false alarm. Now it was real. She heard the soft knock on the door and Alexander's voice outside, warm with concern. "Claire, are you all right?" She pressed the test to her chest, her heart torn between fear and longing. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to see the light in his eyes, but she was also terrified. Terrified of what the world would say. Terrified of whether their fragile love could withstand the weight of a child. Terrified of letting him down again. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were wet, her hands trembling. Alexander reached for her instantly, his arms steady. "You are shaking. What happened?" She looked up at him, her lips trembling with the truth that would change everything. "Alexander, I think we are not done with fate yet." His eyes searched hers, confused but hopeful, as she pressed the test into his palm. His breath caught his chest, rising sharply as realization dawned. For a moment, silence filled the room, the entire world suspended between them. Then slowly, almost reverently, he smiled, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Then fate has finally given us what we were too afraid to dream." She collapsed against him, overwhelmed by fear and joy. While outside the city, buzzed unaware that inside one quiet room, the story of their love had turned a new page. This time it was not a scandal or a lie. This time it was life.